I found myself without something to make, and it's summertime. And so why not use that as an opportunity to make the slightly out of your comfort zone, but very airy blouse that has been on your radar for a little while. So I had just finished my Rose Street cardigan. I actually have it in my room blocking. And I had the thought last night, I have another sweater that I have already talked about on a podcast that I wanted to make next, and that's still in the works. But I've had this one on my radar for quite a while, and I'm like, it's warm here. It's like in the 80s and 90s every day, and it's only going to get hotter. I live in Florida. And this is a vintage Jiffy knit. This is the Dalloway blouse by Squid School of Vintage Knitting. It has a fancy drop stitch that gives it this really airy kind of fabric. And I had earmarked this for making this. This is Silk City Fibers Bamboo 7G. I picked this up from Lion Brand last summer when I was on a bit of a rampage of the idea of making like some knitted t-shirts. And this is a lot. I cannot remember how many yards are in this, but it's like over 2,000 yards. It's definitely a fingering weight, very light fingering weight. And it is a bamboo rayon, which I've never worked with before, but should be very nice to wear. I've worked with it in sewing, just not in knitting. But this is the persimmon colorway. And yeah, I think these two things combined, that this will make a cute summer wear, well, really realistically, a cute shirt to wear in Florida all the time. So I'm now going to knit the swatch, see what kind of gauge I get, because it is an interesting drop stitch pattern. Yeah, so we're going to see how it goes and if I can make this pattern work. Okay, I am knitting on my Dalloway and I have already completed the back. I am super close to completing the front shoulder, sleeve section. And the interesting thing with working with this rayon yarn, I've never worked with rayon before. And at first I was having a really hard time, and it shows. I have a lot of drop stitches down on the bottom. But thankfully, that's kind of the glory of this being bottom up, because the top actually looks really consistent and even. But I'm at the point where you're supposed to knit this until it is 2 inches shy of a certain measurement. I believe it's the measurement from here to here. And so I'm going by 2 inches shy of what I made the back. And that's all well and fine, but this stuff, when you add the weight, like when I just hold this up, it's kind of scrunched, right? But when I actually hold the weight of the rest of it, can you see how, it's hard to see on this sleeve. It doesn't pull as much, but look at the difference. It is a big gauge difference when you have the weight of the rest of the sweater on it. And so I also have to keep in mind that this rayon is gonna grow. And so it's been a little bit of a guess as to if I have actually knitted the correct measurement by the pattern. We're gonna see. But what I have done to make sure that I have it relatively close, to figure out what 2 inches less than my back measurement is, I hold up my back and I've counted how many of the drop stitch rows there are, and I am holding it up like this to measure the 2 inches. And so I've determined that I get 4 of the drop stitch row in 2 inches with my type of yarn. And so I am knitting the front until it is 4 drop stitch rows shorter than the back. So hopefully that makes sense. I figured I would share that in case somebody else is making this in a plant fiber that would like to stretch and grow. And so yeah, I have determined that I am just 1 full stitch repeat, which is a 4 stitch repeat away from needing to start the neckline. So yay, I'm almost there. All right, here we are again. I bound off last night and I could not get it over my head, and I took a very interesting photo I will show. I tried it on and it did not work. So this morning I have decided to try Jenny's Super Stretchy Bind Off and see if that gives me the clearance that I need to get the neck hole over my head. So I've already started and it's looking like it's going to go well. I've got some really big bind off stitches there. So to do that, I have already started. So I have my one stitch there. You wrap a yarn over, then knit the next stitch and take those 2 stitches and put them over the one. Whoop. Hopefully you can even see that. So we have our 1 stitch, wrap over from the back, knit into the next stitch, and then, oh my goodness, this yarn, my gosh. Okay, I have been trying to be able to film me doing this bind off, but with the angle of this neck tripod thing and the horrible splittiness of this yarn, I literally can't even do it. So this is what it's looking like. I'm going to do all the rest of it and then I will show you the result. We'll hope that it'll get over my head. Okay, hallelujah. I'd say my head can definitely fit through the hole this time. I did have to add in new yarn, which makes sense because my bind off was too tight previously, but now I have to deal with right in the center front adding rayon yarn, but we're gonna figure that out. So now I get to try this on and do the rest of the finishing, but hooray. And it goes over my head, hooray. And you know, ignore the graphic tee underneath, but it looks pretty good. Now I just have to sew the underarms, and there's so many things I have to fix. I gotta fix that guy, of course, which is front and center. I have to fix, there's a decent amount of, oh, you can't see that. A pretty decent hole looking there. I know there's some on the sides because this yarn, there we go, right there. This yarn was an interesting challenge. But yeah, hey, it fits. It's a shirt. It goes on me. Yay. So this is my finished Dalloway blouse, which is a pattern from Squid School of Vintage Knitting. And if you've been around my channel for a while, you'll know that I'm obsessed with her patterns. This is my 3rd finished pattern from her, with plans to make many more. I had this in my to make list, and I actually had it on the list to use a mohair when it was first released. I for some reason that was the combination that popped into my head because I had this mohair that I'd got at a thrift store and I thought it'd be a good opportunity to use it. But Sydney herself said that mohair would definitely make it very hot, and I hadn't really thought about that, and so it definitely got shelved for a while. But then in looking through my more warm weather fibers that I had on hand, I remembered this. So I have this cone of Bamboo 7 by Silk City Fibers. I picked this up from Lion Brand on sale last summer, and I will link it below. They have a lot of colors of this, and it's a bamboo rayon yarn. It's listed as a sport weight. I find that things like anything that's a plant fiber like this, even though when they say it's sport, it always feels smaller to me. So this definitely feels like fingering weight. Either way, it was an appropriate weight for this pattern. And when I decided that this would be good for this pattern, I immediately wanted to cast it on, simply because I had finished my long-term sweater that I worked on for months, which was another one of Sydney's patterns. And it's coming into the hot time of year. This pattern is based off of a 1920s, 30s Jiffy pattern, which, not that it's extremely fast, you know, they always try to list them as being super fast to make, And yes, they are faster to make than something that's stockinette because this is so much lace all over, but it's definitely not, you know, fast, particularly if you're using a fiber like this. This fiber made this sweater probably take double the amount of time that it would have taken me in a wool. And it was written for wool, but she even gives directions specifically about if you're making it in a plant fiber. So I decided to go for it. This is the persimmon colorway, by the way, and I really liked this color. So differences in mine versus the actual listed pattern. So the actual pattern has you do your bust measurement and then go straight down as a tube, and then it has a sash at the waist. I tend to hate things with sashes at the waist. I don't tuck things in. I don't tie things. It just adds for more things I have to fuss with throughout the day, and I don't like that. So I had seen someone else omit the tie, and knowing my hips are wider than my bust, it says in the pattern, if your hips are wider than your bust, then you may need to increase the cast on area because this is knit from the bottom up. So I cast on what I thought would be good for my hips, and I was hoping that I would have it be a bit shorter in the torso, to be perfectly honest. But you have to think about that with plant fibers. They are going to stretch out and grow. And I tried to accommodate for that in my swatch, which I did make a swatch. But, you know, a small swatch like this is a big difference than having this much rayon pulling on the rest of the stitches. So I don't fault the pattern for any of these issues that I had. These are changes that I made, and I am perfectly fine with that. Instead of having it be blousey right here, I added waistline shaping. I marked where my side seams were, and I did, I think, one stitch before the marker, stitch or knit two together, and then slips of knit on the opposite side, and did the same on the other hip. And that's how we got here, which worked fine. It definitely created an angling in. When I lay it down, it's very obvious that it angles in from the hip to the waist. It took a little longer to get there than I think my waist actually needed. I kind of needed to decrease faster. But something about it, if you see right there, it's created this kind of dip. And I think it's because there's too much. I think that I had too many cast on stitches. Again, it was so hard to tell on that little swatch what my gauge actually was on this drop stitch pattern. So it's fine. If I really look at it, it does kind of bug me, but you know, what can you do? It dips. It is what it is. Construction wise, this is made really cool. You knit the whole thing in the round until you get to where you have to section off for the sleeves, and then you cast on this kind of T shape and you knit the whole back and then the whole front, and then you seam them together. And that all went totally fine. I will say by the time I got to this section, I was really good at knitting the stitch, but I was so ready to be done. This yarn, it is so slippery. And so if you look, and there are so many more mistakes down at the bottom where I was first getting used to stitching with this yarn. It wasn't the stitch, it was definitely the yarn, but it's a drop stitch pattern. And then when I would drop one, you know, technically I should come from each side to fix that. I didn't, I just wanted to slap through it. And so there are some areas that they are not the same stitch pattern. They have a stockinette line of stitching. I didn't think anybody was going to be looking close enough at my torso, and I knew that I wanted this to be a really quick project, so I didn't bother fixing it. I kind of regretted that on a few spots. There were some dropped stitches that ended up almost made like a hole right here, and so I had to kind of fudge that. I had to go back with a piece of yarn and try to pull the stitches in the direction that they should go. But the problem is because this entire thing is lace, you can't really hide that very well, so it's kind of like a bunched up section now instead of a hole. There were also holes over here from dropping stitches, and those hid a lot easier for whatever reason. But overall, I think it's fine for a quick project, which is what I wanted this to be. The sleeves themselves are really drapey, and it was really fun to make them, honestly. I will say I wish that I had taken care to do my 3-needle bind off a little looser. It wants to dip up right here. It's really subtle. I stretched this in blocking just to try to compensate for that, but I still have a little bit of a dip. Again, nobody else is going to notice this but me. Overall, the pattern is great. I think that it's written really well, and I do still kind of have it on my radar to try a mohair in the wintertime maybe. I like how this came out. I like everything about it except this yarn makes it so high maintenance. I mean, this entire thing is a drop stitch pattern, which is going to be a little more prone to snag on things anyway. I thought that I had picked a very smooth purse. I was deliberately making sure that the hardware wasn't against the shirt, all these things. I wore it to church, and no joke, as I was walking into the doors of the church, it snagged my sleeve. And I have this really long piece that I had to just tuck inside. This yarn is made of 4 strands of rayon thread that are twisted, but as you knit them, they want to untwist. I mean, it doesn't have the grip like a wool yarn does. It's definitely something to keep in mind when you are knitting with any kind of plant fiber. It also wants to grow, and it's very slick and very slippery. I tried using different types of needles when I first started this. I started off on my Chowgoos, which are metal, and I was dropping stitches like crazy because this yarn is just so slippery. So I pulled out my Knitter's Pride Dreams, which is a wooden needle, and the needle itself was fine, but the joint at the end of the needle, because I have the interchangeable set, it was such a jog right there, not a smooth transition like the Chowgoos. And so I literally could not get these stitches to slide. It hung up on every single stitch. And so basically, as soon as I got it on that needle, I put it back on the Chowgoo needle because I was not going to deal with that the entire time. All that said, I made this in a little over a month, I think about 5 weeks. And it took, I think, a third of this to make, which I can't remember offhand how many yards that was. I will put that on the screen to tell you how many yards it used, but it was honestly a very quick, pretty satisfying project. And if I had just followed the directions, if I had just done my bust measurement all the way down, it would have been easier. It would have fit better here. I think it would have looked a little better. Like I wouldn't have had all this excess. So definitely trust the process. Do it by your measurements, by how Sydney's stuff usually is. Her stuff will not fail you, and I have learned that lesson now. So yeah, all things said, I do like this top. It's out of my comfort zone for sure. I like vintage style stuff, and while this is definitely a vintage style, I mean, this is based on something from the 20s and 30s, it looks more modern. You know, this is a type of shirt that we still wear today. I think also because of the length of it, the drapiness of it, it looks very modern. And so if you are a person who likes vintage but not in your face, I mean, this is a good pattern to try. It was fun to make. It's pretty decent for stash busting if you have any yarn that's this kind of size. So overall, the pattern I definitely recommend. If you're going to make it in a plant fiber, keep all these things in mind that I have mentioned. It's doable, and it's definitely breezy and comfy. You know, I mean, it's full of holes, so I think it should be good for the summer, but something to keep in mind with the plant fiber. It's going to grow. It's going to be slippery. Just go into it prepared. But yeah, that's all that I have for you today. I hope that you found this review useful. If you are interested, I'm going to link Sydney's Patreon down below. I love her Patreon. I have made many things from it, and they've all turned out really cute. If you like vintage style, it is totally the way to go for knitting. And yeah, if you like this, please give me a like, subscribe for more content. I have things that I'm making all the time, and I would love to share them with you. And until next time, happy knitting.